Hello, everyone on the line. We're here for the second signage webinar, Rise and Sign. I am Natalie Pico. I'm going to get you over to the presenter slide. So I'll be talking with you today about some signage stuff from Current, along with Brian Spani. So I'm the Global Product Manager. So anything that's NPI related, et cetera, that's in my domain. And then Brian, if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. My name is Brian Spani. I'm the Senior Platforms Manager for the Specialty Division, and I kind of work with the customers, the new products that we need to introduce, looking at if the current products meet the needs or we have to do a slight tweak, or if we need to design a new type of product for some needs that are out in the field. And always looking for a lot of customer feedback to find out what is needed in the area. So love designing new stuff to try to figure out how to solve any kind of problems.
All right. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk to you first about an up-and-coming product, a smaller Tetra Max module. I'll get into more details in that in a second. We're going to do an in-depth look on contour forming. So this was a question that was asked during the last signage webinar, so we will be addressing that in this one. And then we're going to leave a few minutes for a question and answer session at the end. Those questions can be submitted via a Q&A box. There is a toolbar on the bottom of your screen for those who are watching. There should be a button or a box in the middle of that toolbar where you can submit your questions. We'll get them as you submit them, and then if we have time at the end, we'll answer whichever ones we can. The others we'll get to online after. Okay, so please feel free to submit your questions. And into smaller Macs. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about one of the products that we will be introducing in the next little bit. It is a new Tetra Max module. So this module is basically the same Tetra Max module that we currently have with all the great performance, great efficiency, excellent loading in a smaller package. So the purpose of this is to be able to use our Tetra Max product in more applications than you could before. So you know, if you have a narrower channel letter or an application that's slightly smaller and you want to be able to fit Max in, but you couldn't in the past, you will be able to now. For those of you familiar, go ahead, Brian.
And this is direct feedback that we got from you, the customers out there, that they kind of like to use the standard Max product in a lot of different platforms. And it seemed to come about when they had curved letters and letter sets that sometimes the larger module wouldn't quite make the turns or it was too difficult to put in there. So what we did is we enhanced the current product so it'd still be same loading, same brightness levels, but just in a smaller package to be able to meet those needs. I'm sorry, Natalie, I'll let you keep going on.
No, that's perfect, Brian. So for those of you who are familiar with our product line, you might recognize that picture on the right. It looks, you know, a lot like Mini Max. It's actually the same size as our Mini Max module. So now our Mini Max and Max module will have the same physical dimensions and be able to fit into the same kinds of spaces. So that can sort of expand the versatility of the Max module. So as I mentioned before, it'll have the same performance as our current Max module, right? So we're talking spacing will be the same, loading will be the same, all that great stuff is still the same. We will increase the viewing angle, right? So seeing that spacing on the module will be the same. It'll still be 1.5 modules per foot. And in order to account for the fact that the module is slightly shorter, we've increased the viewing angle so that you have the same kind of even coverage on the sign face as you had previously with our larger Max module. So that was sort of the purpose there, to ensure that everything, it really is, the attempt was to get the same excellent performance in a smaller package for this product. And just to bring it all home, right, to say, hey, in terms of performance, it's the same, right? So we have 1.5 modules per foot, 100 lumens per module. Again, the viewing angle will be increased. It was previously 170, now it's 175. Loading will be the same, which is excellent, right? And the nomenclature, it'll be very, very similar to our previous product. There will be a little S at the end for smaller Max, right? So when ordering the product, When it's available, you'll be able to just put an S at the end, and then you will get the new module. So that is basically an overview of the smaller Macs. If any of you guys have questions on this, I encourage you to type something in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. All right. As I mentioned previously, on the last webinar, we got a couple questions actually during the webinar about contours. So people wanted a little bit more information on how to properly bend it. What were the do's and don'ts, right? What are some of the challenges one faces when using contour? What are some of the advantages to using contour? So we thought we would take a little bit of time today to go a little bit more in depth into some of those topics. There will be some videos in the middle. We won't be able to show them to you, but I just wanted to point out that those links are available on our website. So if at any point anyone is interested in seeing those videos and learning a little bit more and getting a little bit more in-depth information about bending contour, they are available on our website. So I'm going to let Brian take over here a little bit on this one, and he will give you some tips on contours.
So thanks, Natalie. So just in general, for those of you familiar with the contour, this will be really redundant for you. But for those that are a little less familiar in how to use the product, I'm trying to point out some really key features about it and why some things are done the way they are. So if you remember, we actually have a light engine that goes inside of a light guide. There are actually two reasons why we designed that product that way. One is that it allowed us to get a lot more colors produced from the light guides. For example, if you put a blue light engine in a blue light guide, you get a darker kind of blue color. But if you needed something that were a little lighter, you could take a white light engine and put it inside the blue light guide. Then during the day, you'd still be able to see the blue color, but at night it would be a little lighter blue. And in fact, with the different color temperatures of white, you could actually vary that color of blue that you're putting in there. Then if you were really creative, the interesting part is you could take a red light engine and put it in a blue light guide. Now the big thing is during the day when it wasn't illuminated, it would look blue. But when you turned it on at night, you would get a different color produced from that. So there are really a lot of combinations you can do with that. So one of the biggest issues that people have is actually bending the contour. And you need to, we recommend the tube oven that you can put that in, although you can hand form this with a heat gun. So let's talk about both different processes. First, for putting it in the tube oven, you need to take the whole sectional piece that you're going to be forming and leave it in the oven at 300 for about 15 minutes. Always remember that you need to put in the insert inside of the light guide, otherwise the walls will collapse. So you need to make sure that that's put in there. You allow it to heat up for 15 minutes, and then when you pull it out, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do something that's repeatable, we recommend that you make a form that you'll actually lay the light guide in. If you're just kind of getting a general shape, you can just hand bend it or hold it with some fixtures and get that general shape and then let it cool. And then the other thing is that you can actually, if you're free-forming and you need to go around a corner or you need to bend something in the field, you are able to use a heat gun. That does take a little more kind of an art to it, because once you you put the bend aid still in the product, but once it starts to soften, you need to be able to move it and then just hold it for like 30 seconds, and then it will cool enough to actually continue to hold that form. So it's kind of an art. I've seen some guys who are actually really good at it, and there are people like me who aren't that great at it. But whenever I use a form factor or I'm trying to do that, trying to make like the letter C or doing something like that, when I take a piece of plywood, I actually just groove it to the shape, and then it's very repeatable. A lot of people do that for something that they're going to repeat. So the contour product also was made to mimic the look of the neon, but yet it's much more durable. If you've used the contour product, you can actually hit it with a hammer and it's still rigid enough. Where if you had the old neon, if you tap it against something, it very easily could crack and break. So that was the idea of making a very strong, rigid product, and then the fact that it saves so much more energy compared to your traditional neon. And then the last thing I already touched on was the fact of you really can customize your colors. And even with the product portfolio that we offer, when you mix and match those, you can really get a lot of different combinations and get close to the kind of colors that you're looking for. So next page will actually tell you on the website if you wanted to actually see this in practice. We do have some videos on there that'll show you how to put it in the oven. Make sure you're always using gloves, because the product, when you initially take it out, is pretty warm. And then you can look at those and refresh them. If there's any specific questions you have, you can talk to your salesperson that can either put you in contact with someone here or call us, and we'll figure out if there's some specific needs that you're asking on that. Next thing is a list of actually kind of the do's and the don'ts with the product. So some things just to remember as you are bending contour. Make sure you look through the instructions. You always want to remember, kind of read through them to make sure that you're doing the proper technique. We do recommend the tube heater. Like I said, you can also do it with a heat gun, like in a pinch, and do a free form kind of bending if needed. One of the biggest things that you always need to remember is to use those Band-Aids while you're heating the product. If you didn't, the walls can collapse down, and then you're not able to get the light engine in the product. So it's just a really good reminder. And you can reuse those Band-Aids. You don't have to buy new ones every time. You just need to put them in there. And all they are is a silicone that'll hold the form factor to make sure the product will maintain the width that it needs to, so the light guide will stay engaged later. Next thing is you need to make sure that you kind of can't do it in stages. If you were bending like a J and you only put half of the product in the oven and bent the bottom loop, and then we're looking to bend the top, you won't really be able to get it. There'll be a solid section in it. So make sure you get the full piece heated that you're needing to bend when you put it in the oven. If you're going to use templates, which I highly recommend, especially if you're doing a repeatable type of thing, make sure you have your templates ready, because once you take the product out of the oven, you need to immediately form it in there. And in fact, when I'm doing lots of them, I'll have two of us actually doing this, so the form's right there. As soon as I'm pulling the product out of the oven, I'll kind of slowly feed it. I'll be feeding it directly into that template. And the biggest thing is it's just so much easier to move coming right out of the oven, because even 15, 20 seconds, the product will already start to become rigid and just makes it harder to work with. So you want to make sure you put that in your template as quick as possible. If you're doing really tight bends, or if you notice that when you're putting the light engine in the product that you're stretching, or something like you stretched it during some point and you see any crack or any tear in the actual light engine, the nice thing is that doesn't ruin the light engine, but you can always just repair it and put some silicone over it. The big thing is you want to make sure that any cracks or ends are sealed with that silicone, so we don't get water in it. I mean, that's really all it is. And then once you do that, it's a very, very durable product. You don't have any issues with it, but if you crack it or tear it and you don't seal those, you could have a potential issue if it were submerged or basically had water running through it. So you just want to be really careful when you're making those, because once you seal it up, the product's pretty indestructible. And the last thing I wanted to point out is also our product is very, very flexible, so you can actually do bends in both the XY and the YZ directions if you need to. So You don't see that very often. You usually only see it in the XY. But if you do need to make a slight turn because of a contoured shape, you can actually bend it in that other direction. Some big no-nos, some big don'ts for it is that don't overheat the product, because it will, if you left it in too long, it could burn just because it's a higher temperature, or it could just deform. So just keep an eye on it in the oven. Once you do a couple of them, it's pretty easy. You get a good feel on how that product works. The next thing is, as I had mentioned before, you don't want to stretch the light engines when you're installing them. Two main reasons. One is you don't get as even a light across there. If you stretch it and pull it out, you may be able to see a little light degradation across the light guide. And the other thing is so it doesn't tear. So, and if you stretched it and then put it back, the big thing is just make sure you reseal that with silicone. Other thing is you can do pretty tight bends with that. We have some recommendations in our install guide that you need to stay within. If you can't bend the product back on itself, but you just need to be real careful with that. You can play with that as some, but we do have some minimum bend radiuses that we recommend. Last thing is that I see it very seldom. Everyone seems to get it. But you need to look at the cut resolution for the light guides themselves. Otherwise, you're overloading one set of the circuits. It's like 3 or 4 boards. So if you don't cut it in between the right one, you could cause an issue with overloading and heating up that section because you're driving it too hard and it would look brighter. So that's kind of some general overviews and a little bit about the do's and don'ts about bending contour. I will tell you, the first time that I've seen anyone doing it, it's a little tricky, but within bending 1 or 2 pieces, most people have no problem, and you just need to get a little bit of a feel for it. Kind of like neon was, it's an art. I wouldn't say this is near of an art, but when you learn the right tools and you build the templates and use the instructions, it's really easy to form as long as you move quickly. The biggest issue I hear is that if people get interrupted in the middle of doing something and they allow it to cool after they started to bend, it can be more difficult to heat it up. Typically what you do, if you have that kind of a problem that you got halfway through a bend, and what you can do is actually use a heat gun to actually finish that last little bit you didn't get done. Just try to heat the product back up. Please be careful if you do use a heat gun that, again, you don't leave the heat on there too long and melt or deform the products. Does that make sense, Natalie?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do encourage for you to go check out those videos on our web. They're pretty good, comprehensive guides on how to form contour, what the differences are between LS and regular contour, as well as some of the accessories that we have and all that good stuff, right? So they do pretty well.
Yeah, and the big thing about contour LS, remember, you're not really supposed to, you wouldn't use the LS light engine in a bent piece because they're longer and straight boards. So it's not that you can't mix and match the two. It's just that you need to use the straightforward contour if you're doing bends. But if you're doing long runs, the LS product is so much easier. It already comes preloaded with the light engine, and they're in 8-foot sections. So.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. All right, the last thing I want to discuss today, just a very brief topic here. So I just wanted to tout the virtues of our 24-volt line, right? So we do have 24-volt line channel letters. So now you can use one power supply to do both channel letters and box signs, right? I know people are aware of this, but I think sometimes we forget, or at least I forget anyways, that this would definitely help with supply chain, right? So you only have to have one driver. If something goes out and you know it's a GE sign, you just put in a 24-volt driver and off you go to service it. You keep them in your trucks, etc. So that is definitely beneficial there, especially this is one of my favorite slides. Makes me laugh a little, but especially when you're doing some servicing, right? If you know it's a GE sign and it's a recent one with a 24-volt, you put a 24-volt power supply in your truck, one of the few that we have, and then you're off to the races. Whether you're doing a monument sign or you're doing some channel letters or whatever it is that you're doing. So That's one of the advantages to having pretty much all of our products on 24 volt.
Yeah, and the bigger reason we did that is for simplicity. A lot of times I know that through the iterations of products that we've had, they've run on different voltages. I mean, if you go way back you can see that they used to run on 3 volts. Then we ended up, they even had some products that ran on 6 volts. And then we standardized on 12. And then for our cabinet signs, because we needed higher outputs and more product, we went to 24. So what we've tried to do is simplify the whole thing, that all make products that will all run on the same power supplies. And that way we don't have to dig through and figure out, well, what is this or how do you do this? So that's just one of the methodologies we're thinking through to try to make it easier for our customers.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, ISA. So I hope to see everyone who's on the line there. I think it would be lovely to get to see you in person. We will be at booth 727. So please come visit us there. All right. With that, I think we have time for a few questions. Let me just open up the list, and we will take it from here. There we are. Okay. So one of the questions is regarding the new Tetra Max module, the smaller Tetra Max module. Question is the smaller Tetra Max for shallower letters as well? So you can use it in the standard letter size that you would traditionally use the larger Max in, but because of the beam angle, you can most likely go shallower on the new one as well. Yes. Brian, is there anything you want to add there?
No, and that's exactly it. We're not touting that yet, but because of that wider optic, you would be able to go shallower. It's going to open up. But remember, we do have our Mini Max, which has more modules per foot for those shallower applications for better coverage. But I do believe that with the new Max and the wider viewing angle, you would be able to go shallower than our current product.
Yep. All right, we have another question here about the smaller Max. It says, is the old Max going away? First of all, I wanted to say one thing I failed to mention when we were talking about this at the top of the presentation is that the colors, the Max colors, will be staying the same size, right? So for the time being, they will be in the larger, sort of older Max format, and it's only the shades of white that will be moving over to the new, smaller Max. So is the old Max going away? The answer is eventually yes, right? Given that the performance of this one is very close, or if not identical to the performance of the older, larger Max. The intent is to phase in, phase out. However, we are always listening to our customers, so if ever there is an application where you require the older, larger Max, or anything like that that comes up, please contact your rep, your local sales rep, and we will work something out in order for you to have the older Max available to you, right? But the idea is that it will be phase in, phase out. Communication is key here. Obviously, we'll always listen to you. And if ever you need something, you just let us know. What's the maximum temperature? So sorry, that was the next question. The next question is, what's the maximum temperature? I think this relates to contour. So I assume this is max oven temperature. So Brian?
300.
Yeah.
And that's actually in the installs. So when you can look in there, you can see what the temperature is.
So the next question is about contour as well. So Brian, I'll pass this one off to you. The question is, what is the distance when using the heat gun on the contour? So is there a specific distance that is recommended to use a heat gun, distance from the gun to the contour?
So typically you can use like probably 2 to 4 inches from it. You don't want to, of course, put the heat gun right on it. And usually what happens is during the initial phase, you're kind of a little closer to get it. But then as you're heating up the whole area, you kind of pull it back a little. You want to start to get the heat infused into the light guide. And then as you're trying to get that larger area, you kind of back it off a little and feather it around. So... But
all right.
Yeah, just don't touch it because otherwise you'll melt your heat gun to it. So but I think most people would know that.
All right, there you go. So we have another contour question, Brian. That was a popular topic. So the next question is, what is the best material to use for templates?
So in all honesty, I use a piece of plywood probably 95% of the time, just because it's easy for me to throw on a router and cut out the shape. I usually cut the shape and then I'll buff the top corner where the wood was. And a lot of it depends on what your size is. I don't recommend using plastics, although I have seen that done. I just never had the best luck with it, because if you put the hot light guide in there, and you could melt in the plastic. So the best, and you could use steel, if you wanted to, but it's just practicality. I just use wood because it's easy, it's cheap, and the repeatability's there. So it just needs to hold it in place for like 20 seconds. So it's not a big deal.
All right, very good. I think that caps off most of the questions. There were one or two that we weren't able to get to, but we will be answering those by email, so fear not. You were heard. And I think that's it for the webinar for today. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope this was useful information. As always, please feel free to add more comments or questions if there's topics you would like us to address in the next webinar. We listened to you this time with a contour. We're happy to do another in-depth session on something else if there's something else that you would like us to touch on. The next webinar should be in about a quarter or so we're going to try once a quarter. And I hope to speak with you all again then. And don't forget us at ISA. Come visit. All right. Thanks very much,
everyone. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right.
Bye-bye.